Here we go.
To the fire of love and burn away all things, then set thy foot into the land of the lovers.
Kindle the fire of love and burn away all things. Then set thy foot into the land of the lovers.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone. We're pleased to welcome back Dr. Hussein Adia, and I'll just give a very brief introduction and then I'll let him continue. Also, if you have questions during the talk, if you could type them in the chat, it's a bit easier that way. Otherwise, that way we can kind of see how many questions there are left to answer at the end. It just makes it a little easier to manage. So if you have any questions during the talk, please feel free to enter them in the chat. Dr. Hussein Adia was born and raised in Tabriz, Iran. He is a sixth generation Baha'i, his ancestors figuring among the first in Tabriz to accept the Babi and later Baha'i Faith. Hussein immigrated to the United States as a young man of 17. Like many immigrants seeking a better life in America, he worked and attended college in the New York area, completing a master's degree in European intellectual history and a doctorate in education from the University of Massachusetts. He was also one of the founders and assistant headmaster of the Harlem Preparatory School, a world-renowned charter high school for disadvantaged students. He is also the author of The Calling, Tahirih of Persia and Her American Contemporaries, and his latest book, Foreigner, From an Iranian Village to New York City, tells the story of an Iranian Baha'i immigrant to the United States in a series of moving and humorous episodes set against the backdrop of a changing Iran, the plight of Baha'is there, and the tumult of the 60s and 70s in the US. So we're very pleased to welcome back Dr. Adia.
Thank you, Anne. It's wonderful to start the gathering to see my sweet friend Tahirih start the chanting and praying. I remember her from her days in New York as she was growing up. So, and she's becoming such a charming young girl now. It's interesting, in one of the gatherings that we had at New York Baha'i Center, there were 3 girls with the name Tahirih present. And it was a small gathering, actually, maybe 20, 30 people were there. And it was quite impressive to see that how this small gathering of mixture of Persian, American, black and white, there are 3 little girls who all were named Tahirih. So this, at some point, I had this idea that, and I think I even put the announcement in the Facebook, that whoever is named Tahirih, please contact me, because I want to find out how many folks are named Tahirih and where are they. It's amazing that I receive hundreds of email and reply to my post on the Facebook that they were, I am Tahirih so and so, I'm in Uganda, another one, I'm in Malaysia, my grandmother was named Tahirih. So a woman in Persia that in 19th century, they put her to death at the age of 36. A century later, hundreds and hundreds of young girls are named after her. So this is just an amazing miracle. Professor Brown, who was a great Orientalist, at some point he wrote that appearance of a woman like Tahirih at any time or any place is a miracle. But then in Persia, to have such a lady is above miracle. It was quite unusual. Another research I did, while I was working with the book on Tahirih, we're trying to, of course, go to different sources and trying to get as much information about her. We discovered that there are almost 1,000 books and articles has been written about her, which is quite unusual for somebody who lived in that crazy country, backward, corrupt, really unbelievable situation they had. She rose up, and then she created such a world recognition that we are so proud of her. Her own family, I'm just saying this thing as the introductory notes, her own family disowned her, and they never admitted, whether it was her children, grandchildren, other, that they are related to her. Her own countrymen and women tried to shut completely their eyes to her writing and to her presence and to her life. But then great number of scholars and writer and historian in the Western world, in the subcontinent of India, in America, they began to write about her almost very much around the same time that she was living and she died. So we are thankful to all those who saved all this information about her and give myself and Hillary a chance to put the information together. Reason we picked up this particular title for our book, Tahirih and Her Contemporary Woman in America, was a new approach, because while we are doing our research, we discovered that how at the same time that Tahirih was making her claim and accepted the cause of Bob, how in America, numerous women, they become preachers, they become ministers, they even form churches. Some of the biggest churches that was formed in 19th century was organized and established by women. When you think of somebody like the Mary Eddy Baker, the founder of Christian Science Church, this is a major, really, branch of Christianity, millions of followers all over the world. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the Christian Scientists. Or the movement started by Ann Lee, that the Shakers movement, in that they were part of the first awakening in 18th century. Or the preaching of a woman called Sojourner Truth, a Black slave who was eventually free and began to preach all over the country and talk about the freedom of the Black people. And some people believe that it was some of her preaching that eventually led to the Civil War and Lincoln giving the special emancipation of the Black people. So what I'm trying to say is that the miracle was really appearance of a woman in that part of the world, and its enlightening appearance of the Bab and Baha'u'llah shed its light and create environment that the woman in the West also began to open up and make a claim. They all were waiting for a promised one. They were waiting for Jesus to come back. How little they knew that the young mullah by name Mullah Hussein, has already traveled and find out that Bob was the promised one. So now let's say who was Tahirih? In the city of Qazvin, which is north of Tehran, historically was a religious center. It was a prominent town in Persia. A girl was born to a very prominent family. By prominent, I mean they were all religious leaders. They were mujtahid. Well, I should try to avoid using some of this terminology, but let me explain to you. There are two groups of people in Islamic world. One called mujtahid, means the one who have done serious research and study, and they have brain, and they can, whatever they say is what really Islam is all about. they refer to them as mujtahid, or the leader, or great ministers. And then the majority of people, who 99% of population, they are muqallid, otherwise they are followers. They are average folks who, whatever the mujtahid or the first group say, they would follow. So most the family of Tahirih belonged to the first group, including her mother, which was quite unusual. That she was a tremendous teacher, she was a wonderful writer, and historians believe that if she was a man, she would be one of the greatest leaders in Islamic world in 19th century in Persia. The family were so popular and so known that, for example, Tahirih's uncle, a fellow named Mullah Taqi, has married the king's sister. This is the ultimate prestige that you can reach when you marry the king's sister. So she was named, when she was born, Fatima. Also, she was named Salame. She was named Zakaria. She's on Zarrin Taj. Let me tell you something about Zarrin Taj. Zarrin means golden. Taj means crown. I have a feeling that she was blonde when she was born, because what happened in that part of Iran, which is close to a Turkish territory, they were influenced blood-wise to that Turkish background, DNA. And she might have some blonde hair. So they call it Zarrin Taj, the golden hair. That's how that came. But later on, of course, we know her as Tahirih. And there are some, not controversy, but there was some discussion who really named this girl or this woman Tahirih. There are some historians who believe that it originally started with Bab. At some point, that later on I'm going to discuss this more, the Babis complain about this woman's attitude and behavior and her radical point of view. They complained to Bab. And Bab wrote a letter to all of them and said, what can I say about a woman who is Tahirih, who is the pure one? Otherwise, there is no discussion about her goodness and her purity. This was first time probably that she was referred to as Tahirih, but then later on, we all also know that it was in Badash conference, I think it was in 1848, that she was also named by Baha'u'llah as Tahirih. Baha'u'llah was revealing tablets every day in that conference with in honor of different individuals, and one of those tablets that was revealed was for Tahirih and was referred to as Tahirih. So she grew up in this wonderful religious family. She had access to most wonderful library, a bright mother, smart father, all cousins who are bright. So from very early childhood, she had the chance of learn logic, no Quran, no Hadith or tradition of Islam. And so by the time she was 13, 14, 15 years old, she was quite a learned woman and she loved to read. And actually, some of you may be familiar with the book that my good friend Baha'i Faith has written called The Woman Who Read Too Much. And that's a very popular, was a bestseller book in French language and been translated to English. So this is really her story because she loved to read and she was quite educated. Unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, as it was a tradition in that crazy country, a marriage was arranged between her and her cousin, fellow named Muhammad. And then out of this marriage, she had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. It was a tragic life of a bright woman, an intelligent woman, who is stuck with a domineering and controlling and traditional Muslim husband, who want to keep her at home and not to allow her any interaction or any kind of a relation with outside world. But of course, there was no way you could control Tahirih. She began to use the library, read books and all that. And she became familiar with the writing of 2 great Muslim scholars. One was Sheikh Ahmad. I'm sorry, I use some of this name, but I cannot help it. You have to know at least some of basic name. There were 2 figures that they established a school of thought called Sheikhiyeh. One was Sheikh Ahmad Ahsa'i, and then his successor, Sayyid Kazim Rashti. Their story is well written in Dawnbreaker. So what happened is that she became more and more enchanted with the writing of these two figures, and she wrote lengthy essays and defending their ideology and their school of thought. Sayyid Kazem, when he received this essay by Tahirih, he was so impressed that he referred to her as Qurratul Ain. And I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this title, the solace of the eyes. So she is known also by many historians and many other people as Qurratul Ain. And again, just a diversion. I don't know where to go from here. There is so much thing we can say about her. Qurratul Ain, she began to have so many followers of her own after she became Babi. And I tell you, Bob was mostly in prison or was in confinement. So there were few figures like Tahirih, like Quddus, like Wahid, like Mullah Hussein around the country who were a little Bob themselves. They were familiar with the Bab's teaching, I mean, more than others, and they would interpret the Bab's writing, and they would tell the others what's all about. So Tahirih was one of these figures in Karbala, and she was so popular and so well received that many of her followers, they became known as Qurratiyye, mean follower of Qurratul Ain. Hundreds of men and women became part of that school or following her. She was beautiful. She wrote very well, especially she wrote poetry. Her poetry is very famous, but actually I have read some of her writing and her essays. They are much deeper and much more sophisticated than her poetry, but that's how she's known as her poetry. One question comes up often. There has been some question that all this beautiful poetry, does it really belong to Tahirih? They have done, some scholars who done research in this area, and they found out some of them is not really hers. What happened is this. Tahirih, in the course of her lectures and her presentation, she would begin to quote and read some poetry by different people from old days, Hafiz, Sa'di, contemporary poets and all that. Then as she was going along, she would get excited. This is what I think. And she began to recite, add her own stuff. And of course, as it was customary, she usually finished with the poetry with the pen name. And she, at the end, said, "Oh, Tahirih, you are so wonderful in the way, what are you saying?" So because her name was always coming at the end of this thing, many people, especially Baha'is who loved her, they all claimed that these are her poetry. But actually, they did a study and they found out around 50% of the poems belong to the others. And thanks God, we have the, what they call it, anthology of her own writing. One person that I think we should, 3% we should mention, especially in the Western culture, that we are really indebted to. One is Amin Banani, who was a professor of Persian literature at the University of California, who has done a great job translating Tahirih's work and poetry to English. The other one is John Hatcher, that some of you probably know about her. And another friend of mine, Hishmatullah Hemmat, who helped John Hatcher. So these are the people who translated Tahirih's poetry to English. If you get a chance, and I'll finish with my short presentation, I would read one of her, unless you want to read something. I can read one of her poetry so you can get the feeling. So what I'm talking about. This is one of my favorite poems. In Persian, it said, "Gar be to uftadam nazar chehre be chehre." This is how it goes. If I met you face to face, I would retrace, erase my heartbreak, pain by pain, ache by ache, word by word, point by point. In search of you, just your face, I roam through the streets, lost in disgrace, house to house, lane to lane, place to place, door to door. My heart hopeless, broken, crushed. I heard it pound till blood gushed from me, fountain by fountain, stream by stream, river by river, sea by sea. The garden of your lips, your cheeks, your perfume scent to scent. Your eyebrow, your eye, and the mole on your face, somehow they tie me trade to trade, kindness to kindness, passion to passion, love to love. While I grieve with love, your love, I will reweave the fabric of my soul, stitch by stitch, thread by thread, wrap by wrap, woof by woof. Last, I, Tahirih, search my heart. I look line by line. What did I find? You and you, you and you, you and you. This is typical of her poetry, which I think they are beautiful. There's a whole bunch of them that we can always get the book and read more about it. The question comes, later on we're going to discuss more about this, that let me tell you her story and then I go to more detail about some of the important issues in her life. So she married her cousin, most likely age 14, 15 years old. She went with him to Karbala, which was a place to become learned, mujtahid, and leader of religion. Stayed there with her husband and the kids for a while, returned back to Qazvin, began to do some research about Shafi'i school of thought, wrote that famous essay, and then Sayyid Kazem, the leader of the movement, invited her to come to Karbala. This is something that historians have been talking about this a lot. She had children, she had a family, and she had to make a choice whether she should stay in that confined area with Muhammad, or she should pursue her desire of the heart and pursue what is right and what she wanted to do. She offered the husband the choice of going with her and with the children to Karbala. He refused, of course. And I'm sure she even offered to take the children with her to go for herself to Karbala. Again, he refused and he kept the children. So she, along with her sister and a couple other people, left Qazvin and they went to Karbala to meet this master, Sayyid Kazem. Unfortunately, when she arrived in Karbala, the master, the Sayyid Kazem, had died. But his wife, who knew about Tahirih, invited her to their house. She stayed in the house and she continued to give lecture that Sayyid Kazem used to give. This is such an honor, really, that in the same house that Sayyid Kazem used to give lecture, no Tahirih from behind the curtain is continuing his lectureship. So of course, being Tahirih, and by now she has become Babi, and how she became Babi is interesting. My God, there is so much thing I can tell you. She had a dream. She had the dream of this young Sayyid, most likely very good looking. Bab was good looking, way up in the sky, wearing a green turban, a black cloak, and he was reciting some lines that sound very much like Quran. Either she remembered them, which was quite possible, or she wrote them down and she memorized them. And then later on, of course, when she was in Karbala, she found out a group of Sayyid Kazem students are in search of the promised one, Mullah Hussein and a few others. One of those people who were looking for the promised one was her brother-in-law. So she gave him a letter or left him a message. She said, if you ever find the promised one, the Qa'im, the Mehdi, please tell him that I'm obedient servant and I want to follow whatever he tell me. They found Bab in Shiraz. He got the message that Tahirih is anxious to become Babi and to follow her. And Bab appointed her as one of the letter of living, as the 17th letter of living. And we have a tablet that he wrote in her honor. So what confirmed her faith? Well, at this point, she had just of course, there's a difference between the acceptance and certitude. So she was accepting Bab at this point, But then all of a sudden, one of the Bab's book was available to her. And while she was reading his book, she came across the same lines that she had dreamed of that particular night. And this really confirmed her belief, and she reached that degree of certitude that lots of us wish we could reach one day. Good luck. This was beginning of a whole new chapter in this woman's life. There were those Babis, even sometimes Bob himself, who believed that they should move the faith forward gradually. They should not shock the population, fanatic Muslim, that say, Qa'im is here and this is the new laws and this and that. But Tahirih belonged to the other school. She said, a new faith has started. The past is gone. We're going to break away from the old tradition. And these are the new days and these are the new laws. So, of course, a friction started between the people who sided with her and the people who were perhaps siding with Quddus and other who were more conservative and more gradualist type individual. And this culminated later on in Badash conference that we shall talk about. While she was in Karbala, because of her lecture and because of what she was doing, she created lots and lots of enemies. They attacked her house. They captured her servants. They were going to kill her female, thinking that it was Tahirih. So eventually she was forced to leave Karbala and move to Baghdad. In Baghdad, she stayed with the Mufti, or the head religious man of Baghdad, and we have some testimony by this man how wonderful Tahirih was. Her parents, her father, and a member of family were insisting that she should come back to Qazvin. And she reluctantly accepted, especially after she was pretty much kicked out of the Turkish territory, because the announcement came from the Turkish authority that she has to leave the Turkish territory and she has to return back to Persia. She traveled gradually, went to a number of cities. There were lots of people who became Babi because of her lecture and her talks. In every town and city he stopped, in Kermanshah, in Hamadan, in Karan, and other places, she would ask and insist that and Ayatollahs in town to come and debate with her and have a discussion. And most of them would refuse. And because this was what they were afraid of all the time. One of them said, if we go and talk to this woman, two things can happen. Either we win the argument, which they go, it's a big deal. Learned Mujtahid, 25, 30 years of study, you won over a young woman who probably doesn't know much. So it's not much to gain. But then there's a chance that she may win the debate, and then God help us. So most of them would refuse to have anything discussion with her. So in those circumstances, she would even ask for something even more drastic. In Islam, there is a tradition that when the two persons do not agree in something and the discussion doesn't get anywhere, they said, okay, let us all pray and we ask God to strike dead the wrong person. Can you imagine? This is really drastic, they have a discussion, then you pray and God come down and kick you and kill you. So he would offer that. They call it mubahala. And every time these religious mullahs would refuse to talk to her, he said, okay, let's have a mubahala. Of course, they would not go for that either, because God forbid, they would die in the process. So this was the thing that she was doing, and she became so popular. Eventually, she ended up in Qazvin, her birthplace. There was a family gathering to welcome her and this and that. One of the people who were present in that gathering was that uncle of hers, Mullah Taqi, father of her husband, who was the leading mullahs of town, actually leading mullah in the country. And he was the one who has married the king's sister, very prestigious. So he started to push her around and tell her, you should not do this, you should do this, that. And of course, Tahirih was not the type to sit idle and listen to all this nonsense. So she said something, and this man had idiotically got up and slapped Tahirih on the face very harshly. And Tahirih turned to him and said, "Uncle, I see blood in your mouth, but what you have done." This is all she said. So I don't know exactly in Persian language, but somehow it's a poor translation. "I see blood in your mouth." What happened next morning, a crazy Babi killed this mullah, is her uncle, in the mosque. The uncle went to mosque to pray in the morning. This Babi was hiding behind the pulpit. He came out and stick the dagger in his mouth for different reasons, because I don't want to go into detail why he killed him, but it didn't have anything to do with Tahirih. So the rumor got out that Tahirih has caused the death of this highly prestigious mullah, her uncle, and she is responsible and she should be put to death. Of course, you don't put a woman to death. Also, they put her in a prison, house arrest on the second floor of some houses. And the word got out that the Babis were behind this killing. That was the beginning of martyrdom and killing the Babi, which started in the city of Qazvin. There was a man in Tehran, which we at that point was known as Janab Baha, and later on we recognize him as Baha'u'llah, who was one of the lead figure in the Babi movement. He found out that the Tahirih is in house arrest. There's a chance they may poison her and they may kill her. So he sent some agent and some people to go to Qazvin and rescue her. And they did the beautiful planning. Some woman dressed up and act as a beggar, went to the house, gave the message to Tahirih that in such a night, some folks would come and wait for her by some window of the house, and they put the ladder against the window, the room she's in. She should come down. Horses were waiting. She got on the horse with a few other people, and then she escaped. And they knew that they're going to follow them and capture them again. So they picked up some very strange and unusual path to reach to Tehran. So finally she got to Tehran, and she was a guest of Baha'u'llah, Janab Baha, for a while. From there, just to be brief, there are lots of history behind all these things. You should save your money and buy my book. You're going to learn a lot. If you cannot afford it, just send us your email address and we send you the free PDF so you can read it. So she went, Baha'u'llah at this point, Janab Baha, made some arrangement to have a conference, which we know as the Badaj conference. 81 Babis from all the strata of society, mostly learned Babis. They came to that conference for two purposes. One was to find a way if they could rescue Bab from the prison, which of course they could not do it, and that plan failed. The other one was to really discuss what is this Babi religion, what is all about, and they discussed its principle. And you all know the friction that developed between Tahirih's group or Tahirih and Quddus, and it ended up with that occasion that she removed the cover of her face, and that created such an upheaval among those who were present. Let me just say a couple of words about this business of covering her face. Hijab means the woman covering themselves is not just the cover of the face. Throughout the century, it has built its own body of work and life and information. We don't know exactly whether during the time of Prophet Muhammad, whether the women were wearing cover of their face or not. But we know this developed throughout the century and became such a taboo and such a strong point that is almost sacrilegious if a woman would not cover her face. And by Tahirih removing that, it was really, she didn't want just to show her cute face to the people who were in the gathering. She wanted to show that the past is gone and we are going to break away from the past. This was really the essence of removing your veil when you really think seriously about it. conference lasted, I think, I don't know, 20, 21 days. It was a beautiful gathering. And then after that, the Babis went a different way and they continued the teaching. And right around that time, the Tabarsi upheaval, an incident was taking place. That's the incident in Mazandaran. Mullah Hussein and Qudus were there. She was so anxious to join the defenders of Tabarsi fortress. She even was willing to dress up as a man and join them when Janab Baha stopped her and told her that there is no way, because all the roads are closed by the army and soldiers and all that. She would never make it to the fortress. So for a period of 2 years, Tahirih was spending lots of time in hiding, because you remember, she was accused of killing her uncle and escaping. So government and others were after her. So Baha'u'llah helped her to hide in different towns and different places in the province of Mazandaran and Gilan. So after 2 years, and of course, eventually, I think she was betrayed and they found out where she is. I think it was a town called Waz, village of Waz. The governmental soldiers came and they captured her and they took her to Tehran. In Tehran, they put her under the house arrest in the house of Mahmud Khan, who was the mayor of the city. And for the period of 2 years, please read some books, Dawnbreakers, others. These are such a colorful period of our history that we should all know more about it. For these 2 years, she has limited freedom. People would come and visit her. Whoever come to the house of mayor was enchanted with listening to her and meeting with her. And we all know eventually what happened. According to a famous historian called Nicholas, she at one time at night after, what happened? A few crazy Babis decided to kill the Shah. And they had no idea that to kill the Shah, you need planning, you need plotting, you need good guns and all that. They went and picked up some guns that usually you shoot a bird. And they tried to kill this big man, the king. Of course, they were not successful, but this really set in motion major massacre of the Babi leaders and everybody. In this period, Baha'u'llah was put in a Siyachal. Every single one of Babi leader was put to death. And Tahirih, of course, was taken off from the house of mayor one night, quietly moved to a garden with some drunken soldiers who were there. And you all know that she was preparing herself for the occasion, that particular day, the way she dressed, and she perfumed herself, and she was ready. And she asked the mayor's wife to make sure, allow her son to go with her so the soldier would not touch her or anything. So when she got to the garden, a couple of drunken soldiers, they took the scarf that she was wearing, put it around her neck, they strangled her, and then they threw her dead body in the well and covered it with the stones. And we know exactly where that well was and where things is called Babi Faith. I will show you the picture of that. So this is basically a story of Tahirih. There are much more I can say, but I need a break. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to ask my dear friend Tatiana to show some pictures, and I will briefly add some information. What time is it? 9.
You have 10 minutes.
Okay, this is the man that I mentioned his name a couple of times, Sheikh Ahmad, the founder of the Sheikhia school. He was quite a figure. He was well familiar with Greek philosophy, with Greek mythology, and all that, and she combined it with tradition and writing of Islam. One of his major contributions that even Baha'is and Babis later on picked up and believed in was that you cannot interpret Quran and other things literally. When you talk about the day of judgment, that everybody will become alive and you pass a judgment, the body is not coming back, is their spirit, their souls. Or when you say 12 Imam Mahdi would come back, he's not the same person who supposedly disappeared 100 years ago. It was his spiritual being is the one that will reincarnate and come back. This was his major contribution, and read more about him. Next.
Give me a second. I have some issues here.
What did you say?
Hmm?
What is that?
This is Karbala.
Oh, this is the, I did mention that the Tahirih went to Karbala and conducted lots of lectures and talks from behind the curtain. Oh, speaking of curtain and behind the curtain, after she left Qazvin and came to Tehran and stayed with the Janab Baha's house, there's a cute story that in one occasion, Wahid, the famous, the peerless one, was in the house of Baha'u'llah also. And they said Tahirih had Abdul Baha as a kid on her lap. And then Wahid from the other side of the curtain started to elaborate on some complicated surah of Islam and this and that. And Tahirih raised her voice and said, Wahid, time for talk is over. Please go and hit the road and do something. Because can you imagine telling Wahid, the most favorite clergy in the country, to what to do? This is the library of her father that she used. It was thousands and thousands of books, they said, was in this library, and she had access to.
Tatiana, we can't see the picture.
When I put it this way, do you see it?
No, I think you might be
Something
showing
is
a different.
troubling. Yeah, something is.
Be a black square.
There we go.
There
Now
we
I can
go.
see it. Yeah.
Good.
Okay. But it's not letting me change them, which is weird. That's weird.
Will the keyboard arrows work?
The keyboard is not the keyboard. The keyboard. Oh yeah. Now I can go to the next. There you go.
What is it?
This is the typical how Tahirih would talk
Oh,
in
yeah, this
public.
was some of the, call it ta'ziyeh, that the good Muslim will sit around, sometimes a small number, some big number, and most likely she was sitting behind a curtain someplace and begin to and lecture and give talks and all that. I have seen. Oh, this is the famous tablet. It's a famous tablet that the Bob wrote to her as a 17 letter of living. A good friend of mine, Nader Saidi, has mentioned at some occasion that while he was doing research in Haifa in research department, he came across a letter or a tablet from Bob that talking about Tahirih, and speaking of her station, he mentioned that the Tahirih's station is superior than all the letter of living together. Now, this is something that require more research and study, because we do know that Baha'u'llah referred as Qudus as the second highest ranking Babi at the time. But then this tablet is there, so we should wait for the house to tell us what's the story. This is some scene from the Badash conference. They had the garden. People those days, there were no houses. You had gardens. So Baha'u'llah rented 3 gardens, and he paid for all the expenses. One garden, he stayed with his friend and his family. One garden belonged to Tahirih and her companion, and one garden belonged to Qudus and his companion. And the rest of the Babis, they are set up tent outside. So this is the scene. And at some point, I think in future, if you invite me back, I would talk to you about at the same time that this conference was going on, there was a conference going on in Seneca Hall, exactly the same time that, what was his name? Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan Anthony and Mott and few other American women, for the first time, they began to demand that the woman should have the right to vote. And that happened in Seneca Hall at the same time that the Babis had the meeting in Badash. I think this is the village of Waz, where eventually Tahirih was captured. and was brought to Tehran. This is the house of Mahmud Khan, the mayor of Tehran. And I think the Tahirih's room was in upper right-hand side of this house on the second floor. It's sort of a map of traveling of Tahirih from Qazvin all the way to Karbala, coming back and then going to Tehran, going to Badasht, going to Mazandaran. It's quite really, you have to remember we're talking about 19th century, probably traveling on donkeys mostly, going from place to place. And now put this woman going from this town to other town, sometimes accompanied by a whole bunch of her followers, always accompanied by one or two female companions, because a woman would not travel alone. And she did all this traveling from city to city, from place to place. This was the king of the time, Nasruddin Shah. What's the English? His name was the pivot of universe. That's what he called himself. And then he was so arrogant and that he wrote a letter to Tahirih and said, if you give up this Babi business and you become a good Muslim girl, I'm willing to marry you and I can make you my favorite wife. You know, he had the whole 40, 50 wives, and Tahirih would become his favorite wife. And she answered very beautifully. I think we have a, go ahead, go next one. Oh, this is the answer that the Tahirih gave to him. Let me see. The secondary. You and your crown and your court and your palaces, me and my simple ways of living the life of Darwish. If that's what you want and that's what you are, let it be, but let me be what I am. This was the answer to the king when he offered that, no, leave me alone, I'm not interested. That's in the simple language. This was the fellow or idiot who put Tahirih to death, strangled her and threw her in the well. What is this?
This is the entrance to the garden.
Oh, that's the garden that the
she was killed.
Yes, was killed in that garden. Yes.
This is closer look to the garden.
That was a spot that there was a well probably there, and then she was killed and thrown in the well.
The name of the garden is Ilkhani Garden.
Ilkhani Garden. Yes, that's right. I think later on they built a bank on top of this garden. This is some kind of drawing, a sketch of her face. There is no picture, there is no painting of Tahirih. Whatever you see anywhere is just imagination of the artist and the people who loved her. This is a typical her handwriting. It's an excellent, beautiful handwriting she had. And it's the front cover of our book, the calling. The reason we picked up this calling was really there's a calling to wake up. And then the other book, and this is our friend Sheikh Ahmad.
Because your friends didn't see the first pictures, this is the drawing, I think, of Sheikh Ahmad. And those are the first two images I showed from Karbala and the library of Tahirih's father.
Okay, this is my presentation, and love to answer any questions. If you want to clap, go ahead.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh.
Thank you for your patience.
More.
I had a question.
Sure.
You showed a picture of, I think it was part of the garden where Badasht was held.
Yes.
Whenever I see pictures like that, they're black and white old pictures. I see like a few trees and it looks like sand.
Mm-hmm.
And what I want to know is on the ground really sand, or is it some kind of grass or some other plant? It's always attracted my curiosity.
I never see any grass on a Persian land. Seriously. I mean, there's no grass. There are trees And then the good thing about this part of the country where Badash conference took place was a northern part of Iran, Mazandaran, which is, they have lots of rain, they have a most beautiful sceneries. So most likely in the old days, this picture probably was taken later. In the old days, that area was much more cultivated and much more fully trees and all that. And one thing I'd like to add also, I don't know why this point came to my mind. Baha'u'llah's family were all from Mazandaran. And Mazandaran, as I said, was a rainy area, was a mountainous area, full of forests, full of jungle and all that. So when the Arabs attacked Iran, Muslim especially, they easily took over most of the country, but they could not take over Mazandaran and Gilan because that area was not really
It was a mountain
area, and they were not, these Muslim soldiers, Muslims were not familiar, to warfare in the mountain. So that's why the family of Baha'u'llah survived for many centuries, staying as Zoroastrian actually. And they were known as Manuchehriyan. It's a very nice name, traditional name. And then of course, after 3-4 centuries after Prophet Muhammad, eventually most of them became Muslim. But and that's why his family had lots of houses there, had lots of lands there. And that's why I think Baha'u'llah picked up this particular Badash area to set up the conference and invite the people to attend.
Scott, it's so nice to see you and Guinam. I think all the way from South Korea, I think one thing comes to my mind is that by garden, they refer to planted trees, like a tree garden, not flowers, not something that we are more like conducive to think about. But they had a lot of trees, and most of them were like fruit trees. So almonds and others. So most likely that was the environment. I'm just imagining, but
typical, for example, in my village of Neiris, we had some, it's kind of orchard actually, that you have we call it a garden, bagh, but then at the middle of this, we would build up a small couple of rooms that you could stay. Tatiana is so happy to see you, Scott.
I'm taking pictures.
Yes, that's right. Wonderful.
Thank you for this question. Next question. There is a question, how do we purchase the book? The book is available in Amazon. Just search for Hossein Adie and
Baha'i Bookstore.
Baha'i Bookstore also for those who are in US can order it from the Baha'i Bookstore, but both options have it. Somebody actually already shared the link, so you can just click on that. And there is an audio version of the book in 99 point star, I think, 95 point star. Who else? Do you see any other questions?
I'm checking back. I don't see any other ones in the chat.
Okay.
Let's see.
There is a question about the pervert of the universe. What is that? Name in English. No, pivot. I think it's a pivot of the universe. Pivot of the universe. That's how they call the Shah.
Nasruddin Shah.
Nasruddin Shah. All right.
Oh.
There are no other questions. This was such a pleasure to see all of you.
Question.
Yes, come
on. Okay, I would like to ask Dr. Adie a question. When we were doing the study of the Dawn Breakers, there was a suggestion that the argument between Qudus and Tahirih, when Tahirih removed her veil, that it was staged, for the Babis at the time to become aware of the emancipation of women. So so there was a suggestion that Tahirih and Qudus had conspired to teach the believers at the time about this new faith. What are your thoughts about that?
That's what actually Shoghi Effendi has mentioned that also in God Passes By. Quite possible, sometime by staging and contrasting different point of view, you make it more clear that instead of just somebody, Janab Baha or Qudus, get up and make a lecture of what they think and what is right, what is wrong. By doing this and set up this play or game, I think they bring the point home. And Tahirih wanted that. Tahirih was always looking for excitement. Throughout her life, when you study her life, you see that the kind of thing she was doing, even during this conference, she was riding on horses, and she goes around. And the good Muslim, what they do when they go pray, what they call when they put their head down.
I don't know the name.
Yeah.
But it's something like is a wooden piece.
Prostrate.
Well, they're prostrate.
They put some piece on their forehead, which Bob talks like either clay or crystal or whatever.
And they put their head on it. And Tahirih hated that because she again thought this belonged to the old day. So as she was riding horses, she would go and kick these pieces of from the front of these people's head. That just again to register the point that you should pray the new ways. You should, give up the tradition. Give up. That's or this another thing that she was doing. The month of Muharram is the month that the Imam Hussein was martyred. The grandson of Prophet Muhammad was martyred. It happened on the same month. Is the birthday of Bob. So when everybody else was talking about the martyrdom of Hussein, Tahirih would talk about the happiness of Bob's birthday. So that, of course, upset some people. Her approach was, and I think that was a part of the staging or game, that every time she get the opportunity, she wants to show the break from the past and the start of a new faith and new religion. And I think from some of her poetry, there is a strong indication that she even appreciated the coming of Baha'u'llah, because she often in her poetry, she refers of the two loves that she has. And we know that when her love poetry, she's not talking about the love of man and woman. She has reached a higher level of loving. And then in those stages, she was talking about Baha'u'llah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Welcome, dear.
Hi, Dr. Ahdiya. Did you find any information about her descendants, Tahirih's descendants, if they've are still living or if they recognize her?
Her daughter died shortly after she was martyred. That we know. But her two sons, I think, was Ismail and Ibrahim, if I'm not mistaken. They became some of the mullahs of Qazvin, and one of them actually became Imam Jum'eh of Qazvin, otherwise the leading mullah of the city. Her descendant, others, they always refuse to identify themselves with her. And actually if you read the book Martyr Root and the book that she wrote about Tahirih, oh boy, there is so much I can tell you about Tahirih. There is a scene that she goes to Qazvin, she goes to the house of Tahirih, and she finds what room she was living, and she goes on the floor, prostrate, and start to cry and kiss every spot on the floor of that room. All of a sudden, one of the Tahirih's descendants, maybe great-grandson, come and saw this scene. It shocked her. And then later on, he would say that us family member has denied any relation with her. And this Harangi, this foreigner, this woman, come all the way from America, and this is what she's doing in the honor and respect of Tahirih. Lately, I heard that some other of her descendants, they have beginning to admit, because I guess nowadays in Persia is, and especially among the more enlightened Muslim, there is less hostility and against the faith. So even it has reached a member of her family, and they are beginning to admit that they are related to Tahirih and things like this. What upset me for last few years of my life is that Iranian intellectual, forget about the average folks. Average folks could be fooled by mullahs and all that. What upset me was when I was talking to some of my intelligent colleague, PhD student, doctorate student, professors, other Iranian, and they sincerely believe that the Baha'i Faith is a product either of a Russian secret service or British secret service, or nowadays Israeli or American secret service. This was they would not object to the 12 Imam business and all that stuff. They would always say, no, this was a political thing that they set up. No, nowadays, the same people, they have changed their mind, majority of them, not all of them. And they even apologize, and they have signed papers and a statement to say that, sorry, the way we look at the life of Tahirih, sorry that we accuse you of being a product of foreign services of British and Russia, sorry for this, sorry for that. So I'm sure some of her family and descendants also begin to recognize the value of being related to beloved Tahirih.
Thank you for this question. Friends, you have been very patient with us. We thank you all from the bottom of our hearts, especially all of you who are joining us from all over the world, those who have families with kids who have to go to sleep already. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hopefully we will see you soon again.
Aloha.
Aloha, everyone.
Aloha. Thank you, Hussein. Thank you, Tatiana.
Aloha,
everyone.
love you, Jane.
Aloha. Oh,
Good
got a
night.
cute dog.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Allow.
Bye, Scott. Bye, Guinam.
Bye, Jane. Bye, Tatiana. Bye, Leonard.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Let me go back to getting these guys.
No?
Uh,
Doctor.
Hi, everybody. We just want to let you know about this beautiful book called I Love My Name. And it's based
Oh, yes, it's about Tahirih.
Illustrated by Anna here.
And you can see one of the illustrations beyond Anna is from the book, actually.
Yes.
The little rabbit is saying good night.
nice book. Children's book.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes, it was written by Hussein's daughter, so I was thrilled to be able to
Linda,
straight.
Linda idea.
Very good. Lovely.
Thank you, Mark and Farnoosh, for mentioning it.
Love you all, my good friend from Queens.
Thank you for participating, Robin Guru. Thank you. Aloha.
Good night, Anne.
Good night. Thank you so much. I
Thank
really
you
appreciate
so
it.
much. We love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye. Thanks, Anna.
Oh, thank you all. Okay. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Tiffy. Hi.